All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the orientation for the Equity-Minded Teaching Institute. My name is James Gray, and I am with the Center for Urban Education, and I am here on sabbatical from my position at the Community College of Aurora, where I'm mathematics faculty. I started working with the Center for Urban Education in 2013 when they came onto our campus and conducted the equity scorecard on the math department. And I've had the pleasure to be able to take a leave of absence from that for a year to work at the Center for Urban Education, so where I've been stationed at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And yesterday we did a similar webinar. It's the exact same webinar. We had about 50 individuals who participated in it. It took about 30 minutes for me to get through some of the orientation material, which was great because it left about 30 minutes for questions to be asked. And yesterday I answered about 30 to 40 questions. So with that in mind, we'll probably have plenty of time to get all of your questions asked and answered. And you'll notice that there is an icon that says Q&A. So feel free at any time during this to be able to post a question to the Q&A section. I will wait till the end to be able to answer those questions, but if you get them in there, I will answer them in order of the in which they were turned in. So to begin with, I wanted to do a quick check-in with everybody. So just to make sure that everybody knew that in California, July 5th is going to be the election day for the statewide primary. And so we do have 2 institutions who are not coming from California, which means we have about 20 institutions that are coming from California. And so something to keep in mind that we'll be doing a full day on June the 5th. And a couple of deadlines. May 21st is the last day to register online to vote for the primary election, and May 29th is the last day to request a vote by mail ballot. So the agenda for today, we wanted to take some time to be able to introduce everybody to who is putting this conference together. And then we'll talk a bit about the work for the Center for Urban Education and how we think about education, and in particular classrooms. And then we'll actually get into the specifics of the Equity-Minded Teaching Institute. So the introductions, let me start with Dr. Estela Mara-Bedsamon. So it's about 19 years ago that Estela was able to receive funding to be able to start the Center for Urban Education. And over the past 19 years, Estela and the Center for Urban Education have worked with well over 100 colleges, primarily community colleges, and working with them to be able to identify areas of inequities and then be able to address them. One of the co-creators that we brought on for this is Dr. Milagros Castilla Montoya, who's an assistant professor of higher education and student affairs at the University of Connecticut. And she brings an expertise that we don't have. She's an expert in many different things, but one of those is culturally sustaining pedagogy. And you'll see that many of the activities that we do during the conference are going to be focused on the work that she does. We're also very excited about the keynote speakers that we have. So we have Danny Sororzano, who's from the University of California, Los Angeles. And he's very well known nationally, and he's very well known for his work when it comes to microaggressions and microvalidations. And we also have Dr. Rochelle Gutierrez, who's from the University of Illinois, and she's also very well known. And the work that we're going to ask her to talk about is the work in terms of humanizing classrooms. So she does a lot of work in terms of thinking about the environment for students of color within the classroom and how we can humanize that space. We're going to begin the Institute with a panel of faculty, and we were very intentional with the faculty that we chose. And we wanted faculty who really represent what it looks like to be an equity-minded faculty member, to really be an empowered faculty member for students of color. So our first guest on the panel is going to be Dr. Tracy LaChica Buenavista, and she's a professor of Asian American Studies at the California State in Northridge. Dr. Jennifer Dale, who's a psychology professor, and she's the chair of the Behavioral Sciences Department at the Community College of Aurora. Jennifer Ortiz, who's an English professor at Los Angeles Trade Tech College. She is also a Center for Urban Education fellow and has worked with us on many institutes before. Dr. Maxine Roberts, who actually just completed her dissertation, she just graduated with her PhD, and she was a Center for Urban Education Research Assistant, one of Estella Ben-Simone's students. And since graduating, she has taken on a position with Strong Start to Finish, where she acts as the knowledge manager. And Jason Suarez, who is a history faculty member at El Camino College. And we invited him because he started a group called the Student Equity Re-Envisioned on his campus, and he'll be able to speak with us about his experience doing that. And so one of the great things that we've done about this institute is that the panelists we've actually invited to be within the rooms with us, and so they'll be actually working with us as facilitators for the day. Joshua Brewer is going to be one of those facilitators, and you can see Estella Ben-Simone will be one, and so will Dr. Tracy LaChica Buenavista. Milagros will be one of our facilitators, and we also have two Center for Urban Education members, Dr. Megan Chase and Deanna Cherry. Dr. Cheryl Ching is a research fellow with the Center for Urban Education this year, and she'll be moving on to a faculty position in the fall semester. Jennifer Dale is one of our panelists, and I am James Gray. We have three of CUE's project specialists. First is Jordan Greer, second is Debbie Hansen, and the third is Esmeralda Hernandez-Hammond. Jillian Ice is going to be a guest facilitator. Dr. Sarah Klotz, who just was named the Associate Director for the Center for Urban Education, and Kirsten Kortz, who is also a guest facilitator. Jennifer Ortiz, who we talked about, and Dr. Maxine Roberts, and Paloma Saenz, who is an administrative assistant with the Center for Urban Education, but she's also working on her master's degree at the University of Southern California. Adrian Trinidad, who is a PhD student at the Center for Urban Education, Jason Suarez, and Cynthia Villarreal as well. So I just got a note from a question that says that sound may not be working. Let me just take 1 minute, and if people wouldn't mind going into the Q&A session and letting me know if you're able to hear me. Okay, great. So I'm hearing from all the responses so far saying that I can be heard. So that's great. Thank you for everybody letting me know that. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the work for the Center for Urban Education to give a bit of background on how we think about developing this institute. So starting out with the idea that equity is different than equality and diversity. And when I first started working with Dr. Ben-Simone, I clearly remember her talking about the many visits that she makes to colleges, particularly in California. And she talks about that diversity is not the issue with the colleges that she visits. In fact, representation is something which happens quite regularly at California community colleges. But when they take a look at things like graduation rates or who is transferring or even course success rates, that's when we start to see disparities. And so equity is different than diversity in that equity really focuses on outcomes. Diversity values difference and provides equal treatment. I just watched a video recently by Lee Moon Hwa, and he described diversity in the sense that we celebrate diversity, but we don't practice diversity. And I thought that was a nice statement. Now, equity, on the other hand, is race conscious, and it requires an awareness of how race and ethnicity can affect the opportunities available to an individual. Another way to think about diversity is what I just referred to, which is an emphasis on access to institution and representation within the student body. Equity, on the other hand, will have an emphasis on achieving parity and in educational outcomes and experiences. And so when talking about defining equity in terms of parity of outcomes, if we have an entering student population that, as an example, is 32% Latino students, we would expect that 32% of Latino students would be graduating and somewhere near that. And that's what Dr. Ben-Simon talks about when she talks about that's not happening in terms of the outcomes. The other piece of that is has to do with experience. And so I'm sure that many, if not all of you, heard about the Black student who had the police called on her for taking a nap in a common area. And for this particular student, if this student were to graduate, which I would anticipate that she does, we could say that she achieved the same outcome, but she would not have achieved the same experience as some of her white colleagues. And so what I mean by that is just simply the matter of having the police called on you for what might be termed as a breaking of a rule. So the idea that the police are called not when the law is broken, but when a rule is broken, and the expectation that the police need to be called to be able to address that. And so while she may get the same outcome of graduating the institution, she's going to have a very different and racialized experience when it comes to higher education. And that is the other part of equity that the center focuses on. We talk a lot about cognitive frames, and so this was something that was very important for me to think about when I first started working with the Center for Urban Education. And the idea of cognitive frames is they're a mental map of attitudes and beliefs a person maintains to make sense of the world, and they determine things like what kinds of questions are asked, what information is collected, what's noticed, how problems are defined, and what courses of action should be taken. So as an example of that, it's very common for us to see something like this. Working with faculty and them asking the questions, why aren't students coming to office hours when I've been promoting in every class? And a cognitive frame to be able to answer that, which is what we commonly hear, is that they, meaning students, don't realize that college is different than high school. And both the question and the answer to this really come from a certain cognitive frame. And what the Center for Urban Education does, first of all, is try to make this race conscious. And so instead, we might bring in some additional information and actually look at who's attending office hours and who's not. And so by making it race conscious, we might ask the question this way: of the students who are coming to office hours, it is almost white students. Why is that? Latinx students have busy lives, so they have to help support their families. And so we could see here that by changing the cognitive frame a bit, we get a different question out of it, and we get a different sort of answer out of it as well. We can continue to do this further, and this is where the Center for Urban Education really wants the faculty we work with to be. Saying something like, but my office mate always has Latinx students coming to our office hours. Why aren't they coming to mine? So not just taking in information about the student, but also taking information about how things compare to colleagues as well. One of the things that we would suggest is, well, let's look at how you are messaging office hours to see how students might be experiencing your invitations differently. And we very much are interested in the messaging and how those messages can be interpreted and understood differently when it comes to race and ethnicity. So the work that we do is we provide those tools. We provide those tools to change the cognitive frame, to be able to take a look at problems differently, to ask questions differently, and get different types of answers out of it. And so what we see on the left here are the kinds of tools. We have, for example, observation tools, where we can sit into a classroom and we just literally just count who's speaking and who's not speaking. And then we take a look at that broken down by race and ethnicity. And what is predominant, the predominant pattern that we find is that white students, in particular white males, tend to be the students who speak up the most. And so that's an example of an observation tool that we give to change that cognitive frame. And here it says equity-minded practitioners are race conscious. So paying attention to patterns in terms of race and ethnicity. They're evidence-based, and what I want to say about evidence-based is not just about bringing one piece of evidence in, it's about drilling down further and further in terms of what kind of evidence we're gathering. Practice focus, which means we tend to focus on what is happening in terms of the teacher, in terms of the teacher's practice, as opposed to trying to find explanations that are inherent within the student, such as the belief that Latinx students, they lead busy lives and they have a lot of family responsibility. Equity practitioners are systemically aware. which means that we help faculty understand historical and structural forms of racism that has led to the systems that we have now. And finally, equity-minded practitioners are equity advancing, which means they're very much focused on action. So I want to talk about the before, the during, and the after at the Institute, but I want to start with the after. And I just want to do this as a reminder of what we envision will happen on your campuses when you go back, which is it's going to be important for the members of the team to work as a community while the redesign classes are being implemented in the fall of 2018. So the idea of having 10 members on the team is that everybody can get to work together, they can share their ideas, they can work through strategies together, and they can try to create a redesigned environment within their classrooms. What the Center for Urban Education is going to do during that time is we're going to have monthly webinars, we'll have monthly blogs, and then we'll have message boards where people from the teams can post questions and get our thoughts and our responses to some of the same things that you are addressing on your campus. During the Institute, so what I want to do is I want to share the draft agenda that we have. And so we will start out at 8 a.m. with a conference registration and breakfast. We'll have about 30 minutes worth of introduction and opening remarks from Dr. Ben-Simone. And then, like I mentioned before, we're going to go straight to the faculty panel so we can get kind of a vision of what equity-minded, successful faculty look like, how they think about themselves, and how they think about students. After a break, we'll get into the first session, which is reframing the first day of a course with the focus on microaggression and microaffirmations. And then after that, we'll get to the lunch and the keynote speaker, Rochelle Gutierrez. And one thing that I wanted to add about this, so what we've done is we've really tried to build upon each of the sessions. So each session builds upon itself, and there are going to be themes and threads that go throughout. As an example, so if you were to do a YouTube search and search for the phrase Tracy LaChica Buena Vista naming, then you get this video which comes up. And the title of the video is The Politics of Naming. And what I really like about this is she talks about the idea of correctly pronouncing students' names, starting from the first day of class and continuing throughout the semester. But what I like about it is she doesn't approach it from the cognitive frame of kindness or politeness, that it's just polite to learn how to pronounce someone's name. She comes at it from a different cognitive frame, one that talks about power. And she talks about how names have significance, that they have histories, that they have meanings, and they are something which is very important to students. And so if a student's name is not pronounced correctly, what that can do is that can invalidate the history, it can invalidate the meaning, and can sometimes even invalidate the student themselves. So she comes at it from a very different very different cognitive frame. And so I suggest that you just it's about a 4-minute video, just take and watch that video to get a sense of how we're going to approach things. And so after the faculty panel, we'll get straight into this idea of reframing the first day of a course with a focus on microaggression and microaffirmations. We're going to be drawing out information from the faculty panel to lead into the into the first session, which is reframing the first day. And this fits wonderfully with the work that Rochelle Gutierrez does around humanizing the classroom. So the rest of the day, we're going to get into classroom level data and values assessment. And so each of your team leaders has been asked to make sure that everybody has their classroom level data that they can bring with them. And I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about how we think about that and how we think about it during the Institute. And the other thing that you've been asked for is to bring the syllabus for at least one of your classes. And we're going to do some actual redesign of the syllabus during this particular session. At the end of the first day, we'll have a reception, which will be in the banquet room, where I believe we have a free bar up to, there's a limit to it, but there'll be a free bar if you're there, at least for a while. So the second day of the Institute, this is when our co-creator, Dr. Milagros Castillo Montoya, is really using her expertise when it comes to culturally sustaining pedagogy. So at 8 a.m., we'll start with the breakfast, and we'll start with just team time where everybody can get together and just talk. After a welcome, a short welcome, we'll travel to the discipline-specific rooms. So instead of being with your college team, we'll actually be breaking you up into disciplines. So disciplines such as the social sciences, STEM courses, that type of thing. With session 4, what we do is we're really trying to build a foundation for how we can use our students' lives in the classrooms. And so what we'll be learning how to do during session 4 is to draw out the assets of our students, assets that students can use to be successful within the course. After a break, we'll get into session 5, and I'll be talking more about session 5 and the idea of core ideas in a minute. But the idea of session 5 is that we're going to take a core idea of your discipline, and we're going to think about ways that we can redesign that from an equity point of view. After that session, we'll go to lunch, and we'll get the keynote address by Dr. Daniel Solorzano. And then session 6 is really meant to connect sessions 4 and session 5. So session 4 is about how do we draw out and use the assets of our students. Session 5 is how do we reimagine what one of our core ideas looks like. Session 6 is about being able to connect those two things. After a break, we'll get to session 7, which is really just an hour and a half for people just to sit and do some planning, whether that means talking with each other, doing some brainstorming, or actually starting to map out some of the things that you can do in your course. So before the Institute. So as I mentioned, we're asking that everybody brings a copy of the syllabus, and following this email, once we get the video of this webinar online, we'll actually provide you with a document which is titled, "Who Does Your Syllabus Serve?" And I'll be talking about that in a moment. We've also asked that you bring your data, a copy of your data, and I'll show an example of what that looks like as well. And then this idea of a disciplinary core idea, which I just mentioned for day 2 of the webinar. What we're going to be asking people to do is brainstorm a core concept of one of your courses. So who does the syllabus serve protocol? So it's a very common thing that we do at the Center for Urban Education, where we provide the frame of reference of just asking the question, who does the syllabus serve? So the syllabus actually serves quite a few number of entities and individuals. One is the greater institution. And so the institution could do things like require faculty to include content in their syllabi that meets accreditation standards, make students aware of institution policies, and promote its values and beliefs. So there can be portions of the syllabus which are there primarily to serve needs of the institution. There are portions which are designed to meet the needs of departments. And so that can come with certain standardized syllabi template demonstrating departmental values. And departments can also have their own expectations in terms of what they ask of students. Syllabi also can meet the needs of faculty, and so faculty can create their syllabi, and often what we find is that there are rules and policies that exist within the syllabus that are really meant to meet the need of faculty in terms of perhaps something negative that happened in a class before, whether it's cheating with the student or something has happened with the student, and so it's very common for rules and policies to be implemented to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen again. And it's not to say that it's not valuable to be able to address those things, but what we find is that the rules and policies really are designed sort of for the faculty to feel like they can be able to address those things within the class. And of course, there are portions of the syllabi which are meant to serve students. And so very quickly, what it would look like to do this particular protocol is to read through a syllabus. And when you see a portion there that says, yeah, that looks like it's meant there to serve the need of the institution, to write institution next to it. And we see a portion which is, yeah, that's meant to serve the department, to write that. And to serve the faculty, to be able to do that as well. And of course, do the same thing with students. So the second piece of it is the data template. And with the data template, it's very important to create the right positive sort of cognitive frame when it comes to looking at the data. common sort of cognitive frames when we think about why there are gaps with them for some particular groups of students. We tend to go to places like, well, that particular group doesn't value education, that their lives are too messy, there's an entitlement mentality, they don't know how to do college, they're unprepared in terms of their skills, and they went to a poor high school. So it's really important that we use the data in a positive way. And as an example, what I'm doing is I'm presenting what my data was before I started working with the Center for Urban Education. So this particular course is actually a combination of Calculus 1 and Calculus 2. And over on the left-hand side are the race and ethnic groups that have been defined by my college. And when students fill out their application, these are the choices that they have. The second column is enrolled at census. And so what this means is that about 2.5 or 3 weeks into the semester, there becomes a date where if the students drop the class before then they get a refund, and they also do not show up on the roster. If they are in the class after that deadline, they will stay on the official roster for the remaining of the semester. They will have the ability to drop later, but they will still get a grade. And when I say they will get a grade, I'm referring to a W, so we count withdrawals as a grade, a non-successful grade in our course. So the retention rate is those students who completed the course. In other words, they did not withdraw, so they're either going to get an A, B, C, D, or F in the course. The success rate is the number of students who got an A, B, or C in the course. And so if you can imagine the first time that I saw this, and in particular being the department chair and wondering how on earth I was going to lead a department through this when my data is not particularly good. One of the things that I noticed is that the retention and success rate for my Black students was well below the rates of other groups. And when you see this and you see this in isolation, this is when you get to that point where you think, yeah, this really confirms my beliefs about some particular groups of students. So we've also asked for the department level data to come with it. And so with the department level data, what I want to point out is that the success rate for Black students was actually quite different. So there's still a gap for Black students in terms of retention and in terms of success rates, but it's very different than it was for mine. Mine was much lower. And this can change my cognitive frame. And one of the things that I thought about, what would happen if I removed my data from the department data? And what I realized is that the gap would be even smaller, and it would be pretty close to being gone, as a matter of fact. And what that made me think was there have to be some individual, some colleagues of mine for whom Black students are above average. And it makes me ask the questions, well, what questions can I ask them to learn about my own outcomes? So in other words, I'm going to study my colleagues who I know are getting higher outcomes for Black students. So kinds of questions that I would ask, and I had the great fortune of being the department chair and doing observations, and so I would pay attention to things like, well, how are they conducting group work, and who's being involved with it, who's speaking up, who's remaining quiet. Other questions, how do they connect with students? What kind of relationships do they develop with students? And another one, how do they draw on the assets? How do they draw on students' assets? And so that was another important one, which gets us into the next part of it, which is the idea of disciplinary core ideas. So just as a reminder, on the second day, we're going to be doing a session on how do we draw out students' assets, and we're going to be doing a session on thinking about a disciplinary core idea a bit differently so we can connect those two together. So we can re-envision a core idea of the discipline. I meant to point out that we want a bit of work being done on this, and there's no right or wrong answer for this. But what we're looking for basically is, you can see the picture on the top is a picture of shoes that are too small. The picture below is shoes that are too big. And so what will be useful is to think about a disciplinary core idea as being just the right fit. And what we mean by that, I'm going to give a few examples that I hope illustrate that. But as I got yesterday, there's likely to be several questions on it, and it's worth it for me to spend time answering questions on that. So if I were to think about maybe a core idea that was too broad, so the shoes are too big, developing critical thinking is something that's just too big. I don't really have the ability to sort of think about this about re-envisioning or redesigning this because it's just too large of a concept. If I were to think about something very specific, like solving linear equations of fractions, that's just too specific. And so what I might do instead is I might brainstorm something like modeling with functions, which is something that's not quite too big and it's not quite too small. And when I get together with people who are also in the math discipline on the second day, we could turn this into a discussion. Well, I think modeling with functions would be good. What do you think? And we can sort of share ideas, and we can think about and refine this even further. So core idea for sociology. So something that might be considered too big is this framework, which is social conflicts, is going to be just too big. Something like culture shock would be too small. But something like sociological imagination would be something that would be just about right to be able to re-envision that. For ethnic studies, identity politics is something that would be very large. Something like the Equal Rights Amendment would be too fine. Something like social construction identity would sort of fit right into that area where it could become effective. And writing, last example, so academic writing in total is just a very large subject. Something like subject-verb agreement wouldn't make much sense to be able to redesign that in terms of what we're looking for. But something like audience awareness would be that core idea, which would work very well to think about how we can redesign that. So a couple of things to think about for core ideas, the way they're defined in terms of how we're using them. And everyone will get a copy of this PowerPoint, so you don't have to write this down really quickly. But the idea is thinking about what is one core idea in your course, and a disciplinary core idea should meet at least two criteria. So one would be have a broad importance across multiple disciplines or be a key organizing concept of a single discipline. And so the idea of sociological imagination is one of those which is a key organizing concept of the discipline of sociology. Provide a key tool for understanding and investigating more complex ideas and solving problems. So my idea of modeling with functions is an idea that works as a key tool for being able to understand and investigate more complex problems. Relate to the interest and life experience of students or be connected to societal or personal concerns that require scientific or technical knowledge. And then the last one is to be teachable and learnable over multiple grades at increasing levels of depth and sophistication. So I think all of the four examples of core ideas that we talked about fit that very last one. Okay, and just as a reminder, what we're looking for is we're looking for a brainstorm of ideas. We're not looking for a finished product when we come. It'll be helpful to have brainstormed and thought about this, and then it'll be helpful for everybody in the discipline to be able to get together and talk about how we might be able to refine it even more. So just a couple of next steps. So early next week, everybody who is registered, I have your contact information. I'll be sending it on email to you. And within that email, there'll be an attachment, the Who Does the Syllabus Serve protocol. There's going to be a link to a recording of this webinar, and we will make sure that we get that transcript, that although it may be a couple of days after we get the video out before we get it transcripted, but we do have a transcription service to do that. And it's going to include a reading about culturally sustaining pedagogy. And in fact, at the webinar yesterday, people asked for more than just a single reading. We have collected readings for everybody that are going to be included in the workbook, so I'm going to pull some of those readings from that. Okay, so at this point, we have about 25 minutes, and I'll go ahead and take questions. So let's see. So the first question I see is, will we have access to these slides after the meeting? So the answer to that is yes. We'll provide the access to these slides, and that'll come early next week once we get the video online and include the link with it. Next question, should we have syllabi, course data, etc. in hard copy, or can we have it on a laptop or other electronic device? Yes, you can have it in either hard copy or you can have it on an electronic device. each of the rooms that we're going to be in will have Wi-Fi access. And so you'll be able to pull up anything from the internet if you need to. Okay, so I see, I'm sorry, but the webinar just stopped for me. It's back now, so I hope that worked out, Jeff. Let's see, so will today's slideshow be available for us to download and review after the orientation? If so, where will we be able to access? So yes, it'll be available to you, and I'll be sending a link to your the email that you provided when you registered for the institute. Says, I realize we have a limited time at the conference, but would bringing 2 syllabi be okay? Yes, bringing 2 syllabi would be okay. It may be, well, it will be okay. We probably will focus on one, but it may be worth it to you to be able to do the who does the syllabus serve protocol on both of those syllabi. Next question, I haven't been keeping track of racial demographics. Do colleges usually keep track of that data for individual courses? And I think the answer to that question is no. This is something that more recently has been happening, especially with more and more of the colleges that we work with. This was something that we did at the Community College of Aurora, and the reason that we did it is because we're making changes to the syllabi, we're making changes to the first day classes, we're making lots of changes to curriculum that we're doing, and we wanted to make sure that we were measuring whether it was actually working or not. And the other piece that was really important was knowing that there are faculty who do very well in terms of getting equitable outcomes of their students, allowed me as the department chair to actually go and learn from those particular faculty. And so it's really just something which has happened in the last couple of years, but the value of it, we're getting more and more colleges who are starting to do that. So I teach 5 or 6 different courses within English. Which courses should I focus on when providing data for the Institute, or to focus on redesigning? We have asked that that data be provided for each of the courses that you teach. Having said that, sometimes it makes more sense to focus on one particular course, and the kinds of things that can influence that. It could be a couple of things. So one is if it's a course which is high enrolled. So an example, like an English 101 course, like a first year English composition course, oftentimes people make the decision to focus on that just because it usually provides a greater number of data than a lot of the faculty who teach literature at the Community College of Aurora may only have just a couple of sections, and they feel like they don't get as much value in seeing that data. Another thing is thinking about the importance of the course. And so it is very common when we work with colleges that they focus on the first year English or the first year math course, because those are courses that every student needs. And so oftentimes just the importance of that course for students to complete their degree or to transfer means that that's the kind of course that we focus on. With each of the colleges that we work with, we do understand there are things on the ground, decisions that need to be made on the ground. And so really I would, in addition to what I just said, I would also say that it needs to make sense for you. It needs to be of value to you. And so we would ask that you include your thoughts in that when you make that decision as well. Should we identify the institution, department, faculty, student on our syllabus ahead of time, or will we do that at the conference? Good question. So that is expected to be done beforehand. It usually doesn't take that long, but there really won't be much time during the conference to be able to do that. So we ask that to be done beforehand. Do we need to get the demographic data prior to the conference? This was a question that came up yesterday. And so the contact that we have with each college has been asked to work with the institutional research office to be able to provide that to everyone. And we've asked them to do that and respect the privacy. And so we would not be collecting that data prior to the conference. And so it would be expected that the IR office would give it to you. What was realized is that many of the faculty who were on the call we're not aware of this, and so somewhere along the lines that that ball has been dropped, and so so I will be contacting each of the colleges just to as a reminder for that, and try to get an update on where those things are happening. How large are the discipline-specific groups expected to be on day 2? So right now we have some groups which are larger, and so each of the team groups that you're going to be, each of the team rooms will be somewhere between 40 and 50 faculty, which means there'll be 4 and 5 teams in each room. According to the counts that we have now, it looks like there'll be some, like the social sciences, there could be as many as 50 in those rooms. For science and mathematics, and maybe 25. And so that's my guess, is it's going to be somewhere between 20 and 50 in each room. When brainstorming ahead of time, these core ideas, example given writing and rhetorical awareness, should we start now developing these through a lens of equality? Or is the plan more to develop core ideas now based on our present lens, then developing and revising them further as we explore issues of equity at the conference itself? So what's going to be provided when we talk about core ideas is actually working together with your colleagues to be able to refine this idea even further. And so we're not asking for much to happen other than for some brainstorming to happen. And it looks like when you talked about rhetorical awareness, you have the sort of a brainstorm which is in mind. We want this work to happen within the group. And so if you were to go and study that further and think about developing it further, I don't think that that would necessarily be a problem. But just in terms of what we're expecting when you come, we're really just expecting for you to, having done some brainstorming, and so you can share your ideas with your colleagues. We've really got an hour to be able, an hour and 15 minutes to be able to flesh that out. Discipline core idea, can we consider more than one, or is it better to focus our time, work on just one? Again, it's just going to be a brainstorming thing, and so not too much work is expected of it, but certainly welcome to develop more than one idea and bring that and be able to share that with your colleagues. On the slide with the 4 ideas found towards the end of the PowerPoint, could you give an example of what these mean? And so I'm not exactly sure what that means, but my guess is that it's this, simply because I'm counting these 4 ideas. So yes, so have broad importance across multiple disciplines, or be a key organizing concept of a single discipline. And so when I think about sociological imagination, given as an example of a key organizing concept, so sociological imagination is something which acts as a framework for people to be able to draw on their own lives and their own understandings and their own environments and customs and cultures to be able to understand other areas of sociology. And so I don't have a particularly good example of that other than just thinking about, if I want to understand how some custom happens in one society, what I do is I use my sociological imagination, which is my ability to sort of vision how things work in my own society and be able to understand that someone else's society is part of that. Provide a key tool. Let me just move this around. Provide a key tool for understanding or investigating more complex ideas and solving problems. And so what I suggested for math, which was the modeling with functions. And so if we think about going out and trying to solve real world problems, looking for patterns and trying to create models for that, the idea of a function works pretty well with it. It's a tool in mathematics which was developed, and the ability to apply that tool to many different situations is of great value. So whether we're talking about something that has linear growth, or is a falling object that has quadratic growth, fits a quadratic model, or something which fits an exponential model, each of those different types of models, the key tool of functions is something which can be used to help solve those problems in a more refined and systematic way. So related to interests and life experiences of students, or connected to societal or personal concerns that require scientific or technical knowledge. So the scientific or technical knowledge, when we got this, it was actually taken from a group that did work in STEM, which is, I think, where the scientific or technical knowledge comes from. But if I focus on relate to the interest and life experiences of students, or be connected to societal or personal concerns. And so this idea of, well, there are many different forms of being able to think about this. So socio-political teaching, for example, where we don't just take a look at, well, since my area is math, we don't just take a look at math as something which just is. We're also interested in understanding sort of the political and social reasons that helped math develop as it did. And so something like that could mean thinking about how mathematics was developed primarily, at least the way we think about it now, primarily by white Eurocentric males. And thinking about it from that lens can sort of help us think about mathematics in a much more personal way and much more societal. And be teachable and learnable over multiple grades at increasing levels of depth and sophistication. So I think a lot of things apply to that. Things that ideas that sort of build on themselves and are covered in a subject for several years, or maybe is a part of it, you know, throughout many years. So I hope I've answered that question. Next question. All of my students are the same racial background. Will it be difficult for me to participate in the activities? No, it won't, because I think what we do is we're interested in being able to draw out from the students what their assets are. And so as long as we're focused on that, I think it won't be difficult for you to be able to participate in the activities. How easy is it to adapt Q to our online courses? So this is a good question. We got this question about online courses and also hybrid courses yesterday. And the question that we got, you know, I can relate this to a project that we're doing in Colorado where we are working with 15 mathematics faculty, and some of them teach online and some of them teach hybrid courses as well. We've never made the distinction when we go and we do our work on whether this work applies to online courses or hybrid courses or face-to-face courses for that matter. But the faculty that we work with in a way where when we talk about how we message to students or how we create a community or you know, how we can think about structuring our class, they're the same kind of issues that have to be thought about whether they're a face-to-face class or they're an online class. And so the faculty that we work with have been able to use what we do in online as well as face-to-face courses. Will you also be providing suggestions for bringing this information back to share with our colleagues who might be less receptive to equity-minded practices? Not specifically at the institution, but having said that, this is something which is something we're going to be helping with. So part of the concept of how we'd like this to work is the 2-day institute is really just to give you a foundation to be able to build your own courses, to redesign your own courses. We don't want you to go back and work in isolation on your own courses in the fall semester. We really want you to work in that community. And when you work in this community, you're going to have some successes, you're going to have some failures. And the idea, as we've envisioned it, is to be able to work through, come up with strategies, come up with new language, come up with new tools, come up with new experiences that you will then use when you bring this work to other colleagues. And so the idea is for the fall semester that you're not necessarily bringing this to your colleagues. But once that fall semester is finished, you've had, by that time, 6 months working on this, then we're going to help you bring this to your colleagues. We'll actually be able to provide, some resources to help you out with that. I'm guessing that once back home, we will be able to observe and be observed by faculty in other disciplines. And yes, so this is one of the things that we are going to bring when we do the webinars and we do the blog. So the first or second one that we have planned is actually going to be about doing observations and the kinds of things that we can look for when we do observations that'll be helpful, even when we work with other disciplines. So thank you. You just helped me decide which courses to focus on. That's good to hear. I teach ethnic studies, Mexican and Latinx students. What should I have in my data? So the same thing in your data. And so, of course, it needs to make sense to you in terms of whether it's valuable to you. But what we are asking for is the same kinds of things where you do bring the course success rates of your particular students. And it may not be as helpful as it is for courses that that I'm assuming like a math course or an English course, which is going to have a greater number, a number of groups of students within the class, but we'll still work with that data. It can still be valuable. Next question, thinking about the core ideas for our syllabi, I understand, based on your helpful examples, how to consider an idea that's too broad versus too narrow. However, how much should I be thinking about general field-related concepts versus more specific course concepts, i.e. how far should I be reaching beyond the syllabus or looking specific to learning outcomes in my own course? That's a great question. So it can actually go either way. So it can be something which is very specific to your course, but it can also be something which is which reaches beyond the course as well, and can actually reach beyond the discipline. So the idea of sociological imagination is something which exists beyond any specific particular course. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be thinking about how you might do that for a specific course. And so if you can come up with even just a couple of different ideas, one which is course specific, one which is more concept specific, and when you get to the institution, then you'll be able to work with colleagues from your field to think about maybe refining that even further. Next question, thank you. I'm so happy to be joining. Thank you, appreciate that. At the end, can you please repeat the starting time on Monday? And so there's not going to be a starting time on Monday. What we're going to be doing on Monday is not repeating this webinar, but instead we're actually be putting this webinar on YouTube. And so you'll be able to watch that at your convenience. Sometime on Monday, hopefully on Monday, we'll be able to get the video ready and sent out to everybody. Thank you for answering our questions. Can you describe what the expectation is for team leaders? What should they be doing that is different than the other team members aside from retaining our course data? Great question about the team leaders. And so what we really want from the team leaders is just to be the organizer. So when you go back to campus, there'll be certain expectations in terms of being able to have monthly meetings, being able to do observations of each other, perhaps getting together to do other types of inquiry. And on top of that, we'll be providing webinars, we'll be providing blogs. And really, the team leader is just meant to sort of be the organizer for that, just making sure that you find dates to be able to have meetings, making sure that people are kind of doing what they want to do. So that's the workload that is really on top of other, that is above what other team members do, which is really just sort of organizing logistics. Would we be changing the actual disciplinary core ideas to relate to the interest and life experiences of students, or would we change the way we teach these core ideas to relate with a question mark? So I'm not quite sure the second portion of that, but I think I understand the first part of the question. So will we be changing the actual disciplinary core ideas to relate to the interest and life experiences of students? So I think what you're asking is whether or not we sort of change. No, perhaps I don't understand. I was about to answer that, but I don't understand. So Jeff, if you wouldn't mind sending an email to clarify that, I apologize for that. Where does ESL fit into discipline-specific sessions? And so right now we are organizing so what those discipline-specific sessions would be. So I take it from the question you're wondering where ESL is going to fit into this. And so as far as I know, there are multiple people who teach ESL who will be coming to this. And so the idea is that you would be able to work together in a group. I'm a librarian who teaches courses, however, not every semester. I have syllabi to review for that exercise, but my course data is limited. Can I use data regarding the use of research help services at the college to perform the related exercises, or should I look broadly at college-wide course retention and success rate? So this is something that's just a reality for some faculty, that they're not going to have data that is limited. We do want you to bring that data anyway. It can still be useful in terms of the cognitive frames, in terms of the kinds of questions that we ask. You could certainly bring data, which has to do with the use of research help services at the college. I don't know exactly what that looked like, so I can't say whether that would be particularly helpful. although generally what we do is something that can be applied to different areas. So I hope I've answered that question. I'm guessing that Jeff means changing the content of our courses to appeal to the interest of non-white students. And the answer to that question really is that all of the content that we teach comes from, well, the way Rochelle Gutierrez would talk about it, she would talk about it that politics is involved in the development of all content areas. And so it's not that teaching this particular content is neutral. A lot of times mathematics faculty think, well, the math itself is neutral, without sort of thinking the way Rochelle Gutierrez asked questions is, who developed it, how is it developed, who really had the power to make mathematics look the way it does right now. And so changing the content is not necessarily the way we would view it. Becoming aware of sort of the socio-political factors of how the content was developed is probably what we would refer to. And so if you listen to somebody like Gloria Ladson-Billings, who developed culturally relevant pedagogy, the 3 areas that she developed, one of those areas is critical consciousness, which is basically, it's not this simple, but if I could just say that the idea is that it's not enough to teach the content itself, but sort of teach those other factors, teach students to be critical, critically conscious of that, to be aware of how it was developed, how it fits into society, all those forces that really help to develop into what it is today. So changing the content, I don't think you'll hear us talking about we want you to change the content, but we would certainly want you to think about how the content was developed and how that can be used to sort of re-image how students learn about that content. So far, looks like the last question is just a thank you. So thank you to everyone. So it looks like we have about 3 minutes left. I'm happy to stick around and continue to answer questions if anybody has them. If not, with just 3 minutes left, I'll say a quick thank you to everybody. And as I said, you'll be hearing from me soon.